Paul Smith, I'm going to hand over to you at this time, and you can open for us with a word of prayer as well. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Themba. Let's go to God in prayer at this time. Father, we are so humbled, so grateful and appreciative just for the privilege and the opportunity to be able to come together like this and to be able to talk about such pertinent issues in these uncertain times, such as mental health. And Father, I pray that you would all give us just a depth of insight and a wisdom from these different classes and presentations here this afternoon. I pray that you'll be with the speakers as they share. I pray that you would give them just the wisdom as we talk about delicate matters and share from our personal lives. But more than anything, I pray that every single one of us listening in may be able to be touched in some way, to be able to be enlightened in some way, and the eyes opened further just to the different mental health challenges that we face nowadays, but more importantly, how to navigate these in these times. God, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. It's, I just wanted to double check from a sound point of view. Am I loud and clear? Is this coming through clearly? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, I just wanted to again thank the Tshwane Church, just as the organizers of this presentation, for just a privilege and opportunity to be able to share at such a special workshop like this. It's great to see all different faces dialing in. We've got people dialing in from the UK, from all across Southern Africa. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you from a sunny Johannesburg. And it certainly is exciting to be together here this afternoon. You know, as far back as I could remember, I would battle with feelings of hopelessness, a lack of drive or motivation. And some days I'd just wake up feeling purposeless for no apparent reason, like there was a dark cloud hanging over my head. And it was on these days that it was a struggle to even muster the strength to be able to get out of bed. And this continued even after I became a Christian 20 years ago. I would always try and disciple myself out of these negative feelings. Stop being lazy. You were called to deny yourself and take up your cross for Jesus. Come on, what's wrong with you? And this would often lead to a guilt as I wrestled with the tension of what I was feeling and going through versus what I thought the average disciple must always feel, which is continuous joy and a drive to please Christ. You know, serving in the full-time ministry as a church minister only added more to the guilt that I would feel of not being seemingly productive on days that I just didn't have the drive or the energy to do what I needed to do. But it wasn't until the birth of my firstborn that my depression really came to the fore, and that I began to understand it, embrace it, and manage it. This time of my life feels like a bit of a blur, and I'm sure you as parents can relate. When a newborn comes under your roof, it feels like your whole life is turned upside down with sleepless nights and endless nappy changes. I always say to people that parenting brings out the best and the worst in you. But from a Christian perspective, I don't know any better training ground to learn selflessness and uncomfortable serving and unconditional love than in raising a child. And that's the good parenting has continued to draw out of me. The bad for me was the debilitating effects of my dysthymia, which is a clinical term defined as mild, persistent depression. It felt like all my energy was constantly drained from me. I would battle with feelings of hopelessness and purposelessness without any drive or motivation to do anything, and for no apparent reason. And it was at this time that I reluctantly decided to go and get medical help, and went and saw a doctor who specialized in chronic fatigue syndrome, thinking that's what I wrestled with. And I remember the day like it was yesterday. My wife and I sat down in this physician's office, and she began to ask me questions that got increasingly more uncomfortable. I'll never forget a defining question of clarity that she asked. How much do you know about depression? And immediately my prejudice toward any mental health issues were triggered, and I closed up. She persisted by giving me another questionnaire that I needed to take home with me to research, and to my horror, prescribed a mild antidepressant. Now, you must understand at this point, I was totally against taking any type of medication for any mental health whatsoever. And this is largely due to the social stigma that I'd grown up with, coupled with the fact that I was a man. Men shouldn't struggle with mental health. That's how I reasoned. The irony of this is that I'd actually gotten a degree, an undergraduate degree in psychology, and you'd think I appreciated the need for a medical intervention in my life. Back to my story. As I thought long and hard through the questions posed in my questionnaire, I grew in my self-awareness concerning my condition. I delved deeper into my family history and realized that my mom had been diagnosed years ago with anxiety, and had also suffered from panic attacks that she was taking medication for. Anybody who's done a bit of research with depression and anxiety or panic disorders, I realized that there are two close sisters of challenge. I also realized that my grandfather on my dad's side at one point was also hospitalized for depression. And it was then that I began to acknowledge that my depression had a genetic or physiological basis, which was an important step for me. As I continued to research depression and began to have crucial conversations with others, I realized that I wasn't alone. Others battled with the same symptoms, especially men, but also felt ashamed to speak up about it. And it took me about a month to even start taking my medication. I was warned of some negative side effects, but nothing prepared me for the nausea and mild headaches that ensued as the drug worked itself into my system. After about 6 weeks, I sought more medical advice and switched my medication for a new SRI. That's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is just a fancy medical term for antidepressant. 2 weeks to wean the old drug out of my system and another 2 to introduce a new one saw a marked improvement in my health. And I can only describe it as a weight lifting off my shoulders, a dark cloud dissipating above my head, and a renewed energy to be about God's purposes for my life. And I want to say at this point that I don't believe that it was just the medication that helped. I believe it was a combination of things that contributed to my overall improvement, which I'm going to get into shortly. But at this time, I wanted to hand over to my wonderful, most beautiful, amazing wife and give her a chance to share how she has helped me manage my mental health over the years.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see you. It's actually such a privilege to be able to speak to and see so many of you. We would never all be in the same room together, so this is really great. And I'm grateful for Paul that he says I'm encouraging and upbuilding. It's definitely not how it was in the beginning. So he has really helped me a lot and taught me how to support him. The truth is I grew up in a house with a mother who had depression. My mother would often, I would come back from school and her bedroom door would be closed. And I always knew that was an indication of her mental state. And, she didn't want to celebrate her birthday. She didn't want to celebrate Christmas because it just triggered her loss. And I think even, growing up, she often went to the graveyard, just to go and be with at the gravesite of my grandparents and my father. And so it was very much a reality in my life, living with people with depression. But I think, getting married, I had no idea how to support someone with depression. It's very different when you're actually married to someone than when you're a child in a household with someone with depression. And, I think, I didn't know how to support Paul through his lows. I remember one day Paul and I were sitting and he was just talking to me about something he was going through. And I found myself going, and how did that make you feel? And he stopped. At one point he stopped and he was like, are you asking me these questions on purpose? And I was like, yes, because it wasn't naturally me. I would put on my fixing cap and I would be like, okay, this is what you need to do, and let's do this and let's try that. And that's not what he needed. And he had trained me to actually get to a point where I was just asking him questions just to talk, for him to just get it out. If you've joined today and you don't battled with depression yourself, I want to say well done, and thank you for being supportive and loving the people in your life who do battle with mental health. It's very real, you know. And my encouragement to you is just to grow in your listening skills, in your empathy levels, you know, continue to educate yourself. You know, I go onto many of these mental health seminars just so that I can understand better what Paul goes through, and other people in my life, you know, the women in my ministry. And you know, I think the biggest thing I want to just leave you all with is leave the fixing cap out of the equation. Nobody needs fixing. You know, the people closest us just need love. They need our support. They need our encouragement. They need a listening ear. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks, my love. And really, my wife truly has grown in being a support and an encouragement just over the years, as I've learned to manage my mental health and continue to manage my mental health. And so, you know, I had crucial conversations around the time that I was growing my self-awareness with regards to my depression, and a number of different conversations with various people who battled with mental health challenges, but weren't speaking up that much about it. But probably the one defining conversation that I had was with a very special brother by the name of John Muir, who's currently part of our church down in Cape Town. And to this day, I'm grateful for the way that God led John to share his mental health challenges that he's had with me over the years. But more importantly, his healthy coping mechanisms, which I've tried to practice daily for the last 13 years. You know, John unpacked for me 6 critical things that he does to manage his mental health. And I don't want to spend too much time on them, so I'm going to mention them here. And maybe if we have more time in the Q&A session, I could share a bit more. But what's helped me manage personally my mental health over the last 13 to 14 years is the following. Firstly, pursuing intimacy with God daily. You know, it is God who has the power to be able to transform the way we think about things. It reminds me of Romans 12, verse 2, you know, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. You know, Colossians chapter 3, verse 1 to 2 says, since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. You know, it is only through meditative time spent in God and prayer that I've been able to achieve intimacy with God and mind transformation. You know, one of my favorite passages is out of the book of Isaiah, and it reads, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. And so, first and foremost, what has helped me manage my mental health is to pursue daily, irrespective of whatever feelings I might be having, lack of drive, motivation, hopelessness, purposelessness. I try and muster the strength to connect with God through prayer and Bible study, specifically the Psalms, because you see a lot of mental health struggles when it comes to the psalmists. Secondly, what's really helped me is to pursue intimacy with my spouse daily. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 4 that 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. You know, I'm so grateful for my marriage. Jackie is my soulmate who I've come to rely more and more on when it comes to managing my depression. She's comforting, she's empathetic, and provides a listening ear to the many feelings that I might have. She also helps me to remain spiritually minded when I want to go off the deep end in my negative thought processes. You know, emotional connection in our marriages is crucial to our mental well-being. Just as Ecclesiastes says, it's so beneficial to have someone help us up when we fall down. And what I treasure most about our Christian marriage is that we have opportunity to pray together. Now, I know that some of you might not have Christian spouses, or you might not even be married at all. That's okay. My point is that you need close spiritual friends who can fulfill this role in your life that I've described. Deep emotional connections with others specifically giving you opportunity to be vulnerable and talk about your feelings is critical in managing your mental health. Thirdly, and for time's sake, I'm just going to go a little bit quicker here. Healthy eating. You know, when I tabled this, I certainly felt challenged myself because it's been locked down, and I don't know about you, I haven't been as disciplined with my diet as I could have been. But, you know, I think a critical ingredient to managing my mental health has been watching what I eat. You know, what's helped me is just try to stay off the junk, you know, whether it be fizzy drinks or sweets or chips or takeouts, etc. And try and include more fruit and vegetables in your diet, as well as lots more water. That's definitely helped me. Fourthly, healthy rest and sleep. I feel a marked difference in my emotional state when I'm not getting enough rest and sleep. And you'll notice that I distinguished between the two. Rest does not necessarily equal sleep. Constant distractions in the form of our phones or tablets and TVs is not good for our mental health. And we often need time away from all of our devices just to be able to center ourselves, to be able to quieten our spirits and to think about that which is most important. So I try and limit myself as well, and also limit the amount of news that I expose myself to daily. You know, if you're constantly digesting junk food, you're going to feel terrible. And it's the same thing mentally. You know, what you let in constantly has a vast effect on what it is that you think about through the day. And so I personally limit the amount of news that I expose myself to. I don't necessarily stick my head in the ground and be like an ostrich. I try and keep up to date with latest events, but I'm not checking my phone every 5 minutes on the latest coronavirus statistics or what interventions people are trying to do, because that constant anxiety or constant focus is not healthy for me personally. When it comes to sleep, we need to be trying to get at least 8 hours of sleep a night. And I know that's a challenge, but sleep is critical. Fifthly, exercise. The Bible teaches for physical training is of some value. 1 Timothy 4 verse 8. Staying active has helped me tremendously. It's a scientific fact that when we exercise, powerful feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters release chemicals into our brain like adrenaline, epinephrine, and all sorts of others. And I'm not going to go into much detail concerning that. There are definitely more qualified practitioners speaking here today that could shed better light on this if you're interested. But exercising 3 to 4 times a week, getting my heart rate up and generating some sweat has helped me to improve my mental health tremendously. So in closing, I mentioned at the beginning of my sharing that as a young Christian, I used to have a lot of self-doubt, insecurity because of my mental health. I would feel discouraged and constantly not good enough, and I needed more faith. Now, I'm not talking of the naive type of faith that says you just need to believe in God, trust in the scriptures, and you'll do better with your mental health. No, I'm talking about a deeper, more mature faith that has come to embrace the weaknesses that my depression brings to my life. The Apostle Paul wrote, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness. And I can now say that after all these years, I'm actually grateful for my depression. But it's taken me years to get to this point. Why, you might ask? Well, my depression keeps me humble. It keeps me trusting and more reliant on God. Because I've realized that I need Christ daily, hourly, even every minute. His power rests on me to be transformed more and more into his likeness. And isn't this the goal of our faith? To be transformed more and more into the likeness of God? I've experienced suffering with depression that has produced in me a perseverance. And that perseverance, character, and that character, hope. And this living hope doesn't disappoint. Make no mistake, there are days that my depression gets the better of me, but what's most important is to press on, is to persevere. And I hope that what I've shared with you this afternoon can be of some comfort and some support as you look to manage your own mental health to these uncertain times. Thank you very much.
Next, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and that is Angie Chandra. Angie worked in the full-time ministry for 8 years, and then she went back to study further and be trained as a psychologist. She has worked with families and children since 2011. Angie has worked with people of all walks of life. She has served in Soweto at a clinic there, in Orange Farm, at Tara Child and Adolescent unit in Sandhurst. She then moved to Durban and worked at the Phoenix Assessment and Therapy Center for Adolescent and Child and Children in Durban. She worked at the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital in Durban, as well as the University of KZN. And then she moved to Pretoria, and in Pretoria she has worked in private practice and worked with a wide variety of people, including students at the University of Pretoria. She brings with her a whole wealth of experience in the area of psychology and particularly working with young people. And that's what her talk will be dealing with a lot today. So Angie Chandra, thank you so much for making the time, and I will hand over to you at this point.
Thanks, Themba. Can everyone hear me? Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Okay, great. My focus will be on marriage and family, specifically in a general sense, but hopefully this introduction will still be seen as helpful. Lisa and Wendy are going to unpack this focus in terms of depression, anxiety on marriage and parenting. So now, just in recent times, the nature and expectations and roles in marriages have changed. So it's no longer the traditional, perhaps patriarchal system where you have complete division of, the roles and management and parenting. Suddenly, both of you are expected to do everything. You're doing like parenting, you're washing dishes together, you also did dual income. So without these clearly defined boundaries, saying, we must have exaggerated expectations of one another in marriage. So this becomes further highlighted now, right? When we're under lockdown, which we have been in for so many weeks, especially here in South Africa. And you spend more time with your loved ones than ever before. And so, what I can say, it's not about the dishes. Okay, the dishes represent something more. It may be representing the invisible work and the emotional labor that you felt like you brought to the relationship that weren't highlighted before. And also you're starting to realize that you need one another more than you actually realize. And it brings out really uncomfortable feelings of vulnerability and helplessness. And when we don't like these feelings, and what we tend to do is we can either withdraw, that cold shoulder of, I'm just going to ignore you right now, I need my space. You can avoid one another by becoming more busy. I know that I was suddenly going on online courses, and imagine making pasta and bread from scratch. So, it makes us really do some very creative things to avoid talking about what you really need to talk about. So sometimes we can actually feel more irritable with one another. You just rub each other the wrong way. The underlying questions in all of these things maybe, do you see me? Are you going to respond to me? Are you going to engage with me? I think those are the defining questions that one has to think about in your marriage, that underlying all these feelings and noticing what's done and what's not done. And when these questions that you have underlying are right in front of you, and it doesn't matter what I do, this person doesn't see me, and I don't know how we're even going to work. Those questions can start to rise. And that is one of the contributing factors of the increase in divorce that we hear around, or desire to divorce. And so there are ways to get onto the same page. which I'll talk about in a bit. Okay, so, but, you know, it leaves your whole household out of sync. And if you think your teens and your campus, you know, children even, or your little children don't see it, they totally notice it, because they can feel the tension. They see the explosive interactions that you might be having in the home, which then increase anxiety and perpetuate a low mood. So what are the helpful tips during this time? So one of the things I generally think about is, before you point out an error in your spouse, have you verbalized at least 5 positive things before you point out that conviction about the error? And so the scripture that usually is my go-to is, do everything without complaining or arguing. That's a hard task. I mean, like, God includes everything. I'm like, everything literally means everything. So, but that's really helpful, because it helps you to pause first and think, okay, because what we tend to do is have a confirmation bias. We tend to see the things that that confirm what we think is the wrong that has been done to us. And so then you miss out on all the other things that might be happening that your spouse actually could be very helpful with. But you're focusing on those points, and so you get to miss out on some beautiful things that are actually happening in your household right now. The second thing, learn how to dance with one another. Not learn how to fight, because usually the input out there is learn how to fight with each other, you know, have some rules of engagement. But this has a warlike mentality. When I say learn how to dance, it actually comes from Dr. Sue Johnson. If anyone wants to read up on that, it's really good. She has a book called Hold Me Tight, very helpful for couples. But anyway, because right now you're probably stepping on each other's toes. But if you're having a beautiful dance, oh, that's wonderful. But if you are stepping on one another's toes, then it's about, wait, we got to see how we can become in sync again. And part of that is to not have reckless words, because reckless words pierce like a sword, as in Proverbs. So you can be honest about how you feel, but without needing to be, well, what was I going to say? You can be honest about with what you feel without needing to lash out at someone. You can say it in a more upbuilding and encouraging way. So, and the third thing that you can think about is to remain attuned to one another. So notice the emotions that you might be experiencing under the iceberg of chores or duties and responsibilities, because that is the key thing. Because all these things are just, they mask what's happening underneath. And underneath, you may feel like, you know, you may feel invalidated. You may feel sad because there's so much on your plate, and you feel, you know, disappointed. Those are the things for you to get to. So not necessarily the obvious behaviors. So that's a little brief thing why I speak about marriage, because your marriage and how you interact with each other is a model for your children. And I've worked with so many families, so many campus students, teens, little children, even little 3-year-olds, you know, I've worked with. And one thing they all notice are how do they see the adults or the primary caregiver in their lives. It may not necessarily be the spouse, or if you're a single parent, they see how you interact, how do you interact with your aunts and uncles around them, the cousins, because that will be their model on how they can manage their own emotions. So moving into the realm of teenagers or adolescents. So like teenagers, one of the key things is fostering connection. So there are so many myths about the adolescent brain, right? Usually you think, oh, the raging hormones are just driving them crazy. They're just, and you know, you look at the eye rolls and like, oh, there goes the eye roll, or the slamming of doors, or, you know, that the teenager is just absolutely irrational and can't be reasoned with. You know, this does not foster connection. And actually, it is not necessarily true about what may be happening. You know, there's been so much research recently around the teenage brain. And the fact is that the teenage brain is still developing. Your brain and the ability to be able to preempt or rationalize or put a pause button only finalizes by your mid-20s, around 25 even. So imagine that. So you keep on thinking, oh, why doesn't he just think before he acts? Well, you're asking the impossible. The teenage brain is wired for reward and risk-taking. And you start thinking, oh no, that's exactly it. So that's what they're going to go after, something that's going to make them feel good. They're going to go after relationships. They're going to go after substances even, or activities that are going to bring the greatest reward in their brain. You know, you bring, for example, if you bring sugar to the, you know, to a child, to a teenager, and to an adult, guess what? The teenager's brain reaction is much higher than children or adults. And so that's why you can use this as an opportunity for you to, you know, rewire your own brain, because what we're finding is that we actually don't have a fixed brain. Our brains have neuroplasticity, meaning that you can actually change the way you think and the way you behave, which is amazing. So this is an opportunity for you to come alongside your teenager as opposed to fighting against them. So, you know, during the time of lockdown, the social distancing is painful because as a child, your child looks at, as long as the parents are around or the primary caregiver, they feel a sense of safety. They feel fine. But as a teenager, your friendship space becomes the more important connecting point. So don't completely take away screen time. But at the same time, I'm saying don't just leave them to their phones and say, see you later. See you in 6 weeks' time. Enjoy yourself. No, because there's also negative effects on screen time on the brain. There's been so much research about it, increasing anxiety, lowering mood. So if they want to have their screens, there are ways to help them to maybe find a helpful app that can get them to exercise, or there's so many anxiety apps out there, or mindfulness apps that they can actually rather link into outside of their friendship base. And in terms of actual contact with friendship, maybe you can have a dialogue saying, look, I am worried about how much time you spend on social media. Can we see how we can limit this? You know, working with your teen, it is so much better with a negotiation rather than an actual ultimatum. Who of us really enjoy the ultimatums? Or imagine if your boss came up to you and said, I don't care what you're doing. You're going to stop whatever you're doing right now. You're going to do what I tell you to do. None of us are going to respond really well. Or if your boss comes says to you, oh, can you stop moping around? I just need you to do ABC chores. And so that's how it sounds like to your teen when you dismiss what they're feeling and just place a demand on them. So remember to come alongside. So model to them helpful tips. So when you model to them, you've got to teach them how you manage your own anxiety. And that means you need to be able to say, you know, I'm actually feeling anxious right now. And I don't want to, I don't want to go out. I'm feeling a bit nervous. I'm concerned that I'm going to contract the virus. I'm starting to use sanitizer a little bit too much, you know, double checking handles and doorknobs. And, you know, I need to maybe make sure that I calm down, use this app, you know, slow breathing. Wendy will talk about how to handle anxiety, but in greater depth later on. That can be helpful. Also, just you can scale the anxiety. So, for example, you don't know how to help your teen, so you can say, okay, can you please help me out here? Because again, it's a partnership. I can see that there's something about you. You're irritable, or I don't know what it is, but I'm assuming you might be anxious. Can you help me here? Do you feel anxious? Scale 1 to 10. 1 being really calm. 10, I'm having a panic attack, Mom. I can't deal with this. Can't breathe. That's when you know how to intervene. So that can be really helpful to bring in a scale. and also to clarify any misinformation they might be getting from their friends. Because as much as they're in contact with their friends, they might get some misinformation about the virus, about how people interact, relationships. Those are important questions for you to be able to answer. That means you yourself need to remain informed about what are the actual facts around the virus, about going to school, for example. I know we're going to be going to school next week, and that produces a new type of anxiety. So how do you know when your teen is having difficulty? Is usually if they tend to have a low mood most of the time. You see a change in appetite. You know, some teens tend to start cutting their wrists, so watch out for that as well. Poor sleeping habits, and this persists more than 2 to 4 weeks. That's when you need to seek professional help. It is important that it's not downplayed, and that you seek help as soon as possible. Now, moving on to children during this time. You know, children under the age of 4 don't really know what's going on. If anything, every day is the same for them. So how they're going to react is how you react. So if you're constantly talking about the virus, I mean, I know Rain the other day was like, the virus, Mom. So is it very dangerous? And that's when I was like, okay, scale back on this talking about this virus or this pandemic, because as little as he is, he's absorbing that information. And then I had to say, yes, there is a virus around, but there's conversations about empowerment. But, you know, we got to make sure we wash our hands properly, and we do these no more handshakes or no more hugs for now, but just let's do these elbow bumps. And so for them, that's more than enough information. You know, children respond to stress in very different ways. Some become more clingy. They suddenly need you to do everything with them, and even go to the bathroom, right? You've gone to the bathroom yourself, my sweetie. You really don't need me. No, Mom, can you sit right next to me? So, you know, that clinginess, the increased anxiety, or even withdrawal. They stop playing, have no interest in their toys. They're no longer as excited. They can be, you know, the meltdown. Suddenly you have these massive meltdowns. You're like, oh my hat, do you think there's World War III? It's right here, right now. That's a sign of them feeling really anxious during this time. There may be a regression, such as bedwetting. So, you know, and during this time, the key is patience with them, because the children react behaviorally. Sometimes you think, just use your words. Oh, it's almost impossible. Even as a teenager, it can be difficult, or an adult, it can be really difficult to use your words. So what's really helpful is if you look at the behavior and you start thinking, okay, what is the emotion behind this behavior? Meltdown, okay, super angry or super overwhelmed, extremely tired, and they just need someone to hold them and comfort them. That's not the time to have this massive debate or dialogue, or even strong discipline. So to remember, in terms of the further helpful tips, let them know that what they're feeling really makes sense. You know, and also help them see what they can do. So if they're a bit worried, say, okay, let's see what you can do. Remember that one of the biggest things about this virus is that if you keep your social distance, if you wash your hands and have your mask on, let's practice putting the mask on. And you can make make it really lighthearted. Help them to put things into context. So like children, like the rest of us, can really catastrophize. Like they usually use words like, you never listen to me, or you always do this. And then you're like, no. So help them to recalibrate. And remember, it's not never, and remind, say, look, you're feeling frustrated. I get it. I'm so sorry. And then later on saying, okay, is it really always? Is it really never? So if you see them worried, ask them, oh, you know what? I see that you're looking worried. How can I help? So that they can see, locate in themselves, that they have the tools to be able to tell you what will be helpful. sometimes I think a scoop of ice cream can help. It's breakfast time. But, honestly speaking, I've given Rain a scoop of ice cream for breakfast sometimes, and it really actually helps. So, yeah, it's just one of those things. It's not the most ideal, but it doesn't happen every day. So do you understand what I mean? Okay. So, and then sometimes I don't know is a perfectly good answer. And you don't have to have all the answers. You can say, I don't know. I feel overwhelmed right now. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know. And that's okay. So, and the final thing generally is remind them of God's goodness and remind them of what's really amazing that's happening in this world, or what you noticed. What we've done recently, there were caterpillars that were crawling out of everywhere. My boy loves bugs. Anyway, so they actually turned into butterflies, and it was an opportunity to learn about transformation. And so use this time to be creative and think about the positive aspects in your parenting. Thanks.
I'm going to go to our next speakers, and that's Lisa Comrie and Linzi Comrie. We are very fortunate to be able to have this amazing tech team between mom and daughter presenting for us this afternoon. Lisa is a registered counselor with an honors degree in psychology and 8 years experience in the counseling field. She's also a volunteer for Focus on the Family, and she has a BSc degree in pharmacy. She has been in the full-time ministry since 1998, and she currently leads the Devon Church with her husband, Duncan. They oversee churches in South Africa, as well as Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. She has been married for, wait for it, folks, a whopping 28 years, and has 2 daughters. And Zama and I admire your marriage, and we have benefited so much from Duncan and Lisa for just years of counseling in our own marriage. And then I have the privilege and honor to introduce Linzi Comrie. Oh my goodness, this is just incredible that we have Linzi joining us on this session today. She's 26 years old, and she's a qualified teacher with a bachelor's of education in foundation phase. Lisa, she has been teaching at Crawford Prep School for the last 5 years. She has served as a youth counselor at the Swamp Camp in Johannesburg, Harare, and Maputo for the last 8 years. She's currently serving in the teens ministry as a teen worker in the Northwest region of the Johannesburg Church of Christ. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Comries.
Good afternoon, everybody. Are we okay with the sound? You can give us a thumbs up. Can you all hear us?
Yes.
Do you want to just say hello? I'm saying
Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
The sound is good.
Okay, super. Good. Well, good afternoon. It's a privilege to be with everybody, and a privilege to be able to share with Linzi this afternoon a topic that is very close to my heart, not only because I've had to deal with it myself, and a lot of what Paul was sharing. I appreciated Paul's vulnerability. But I do believe depression in the marriage and family context, and something for us as followers of Jesus, we have to learn more about, not only because we're going through something that is something we've never faced and is actually a trigger for depression, anxiety, and the things that we're talking about, but statistically, depression is on the rise. And more women suffer with depression. 1 out of every 2 women will suffer with depression at some point in their lives. The statistics are growing for children, for teenagers, and for men. And because it was sort of considered a woman's disease, very often it can be overlooked for men. And it's something I think, like I said, for our families, our teenagers, we need to grow in our understanding and the reality of what it is. We live in a very stressful society too. And I honestly, that is why the stats are going up and up. I think, like I've got in my picture here, depression makes us feel at times like we need to put on a brave face when inside we feel like we're crumbling. And many of us have grown up in families or cultures where mental illnesses are not readily spoken about. They're not accepted and they're not given attention. And I think what Paul shared earlier too, just about men, the pressure on men to be strong always, be in control, be the ones that have got it all together, causes them to overlook and put on that brave face and not deal with what they're feeling. I think too, what I've come across so much in my counseling, and even for myself, the Christian culture I very often find is that as Christians we can feel a lot of guilt and self-condemnation and are not readily understood by those around us, because we're made to feel like something is lacking or there's sin in our relationship with God, and so there's something majorly wrong. And so I just hope that some of the things we can highlight today is just increase our understanding. It's a huge topic. We can't cover everything today, but I do want to start with looking at some of the signs and symptoms. All right, so the signs and symptoms of depression. A big one is the feeling of hopelessness, worthlessness, or sadness, okay, that persists. And there's also a loss of interest in activities that you did previously enjoy. There can be problems with sleep, and this can be either you just want to sleep all the time or you're not able to sleep at all. Then a change in eating habits that may result in losing weight or putting on weight. The fatigue involved with depression is excessive. We can also feel irritable and have angry outbursts. We can battle with concentration, feel agitated and restless. And one of the things Angie mentioned, but especially for teenagers, is to watch how much time they're spending in their rooms, because isolating is a symptom of depression. If they're spending hours tucked away in their rooms, it's something to watch out for. Another thing to watch out for teens is a change in school performance when academics are affected and their work suddenly goes downhill. So, like I mentioned, in women and in men, sometimes, these symptoms overlap, but usually men can feel more irritable and angry, and the women tend to feel more hopeless, withdrawn, and sad. Now, that's just very much a generalization, but something to think about. The next thing is to understand is that depression is on a spectrum. And it's important to know when depression needs to be seen to. Now, we have normal ups and downs of life. We can feel great one day, we feel sad, we can feel depressed in response to different things in our lives. That is normal. We are created to feel the ups and downs. But when depression becomes a disorder, the symptoms will persist for 2 to 4 weeks. And like the condition that Paul was talking about, it can go on for 2 years where it's a mild to moderate depression, but it's enough that it has to be treated. The important thing is when treating depression, especially when it's disrupting your daily functioning, it's disrupting relationships, and it's affecting your work performance. Okay? Severe depression and requires hospitalization, because one of the things I didn't mention is suicide and suicidal thoughts are very real and a huge risk, and that's why depression cannot just be left, and hopefully this will blow over. An important aspect in understanding depression as well is that it's not caused by one thing. Raj, if we can go to the next slide. And I've kept it very simple here. Is that biology is a major factor. The environment is also a very big factor, and there are different factors that go under that. The biology, what we mean, and Paul alluded to this earlier, that neurotransmitters in our brain, when there's a lack of them, it can lead to depression. Our genetic predisposition in terms of our family history. In my family history, there's a genetic predisposition to depression. My grandmother had it. I've had depression. I've had to manage it, as Paul mentioned. Linzi's going to share just now her experience and dealing with depression. We can't pick our predispositions. All of us have different family histories. So that's something to be aware of. Illnesses like anemia, which is a lack of iron, one of the side effects is depression. Other physical illnesses also lead to depression, and having chronic illnesses, chronic meaning it's gone on for a long time, can also cause depression. So those are some of the biological factors. And how we think is a major factor also in our view of depression. But the environment, what is around us, I mean, just like we mentioned earlier, dealing with this pandemic, who of us would have thought in 2020 that we're dealing with something that's kept us in our homes for over 2 months now? You know, we wars, traumas, grief, those things in our environment, how we grow up, stress and work overload. There is, like I mentioned earlier, our society is so stressful. It's fast, it's quick, I mean, you know, we just see, even with social media, things get around the world. There is just like a madness and rush to our lives. And that leads to depression. A lack of job security. And this pandemic has triggered that. And many people have lost jobs or halved their salaries. These things are all factors. Relational conflict is huge. Bullying, racism, prejudice, all these things can lead to depression. Disappointments. At this point, my daughter Linz is going to share with us, and she's had to deal with depression this year. That was triggered by a number of things, and she has willingly agreed to share with us today and just share her experience. But Linz, I think the question I want to ask you to share with everybody is, what was difficult about accepting the fact that you had depression?
Hi, everybody. I think for myself, it was definitely the high expectations that I set for myself. And so what constantly went through my mind was, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be thinking this way, but I was. I shouldn't be down or sad or anxious. I'm young. I haven't experienced, so much in life. I haven't, comparing myself to other people, I haven't suffered as much as so-and-so. My life is good, or it should be good, yet I feel these sad feelings. I thought I shouldn't be feeling this way because it's the beginning of the year. I'm meant to be energetic. I'm meant to be energized and ready to teach my class, but it was opposite to that. And therefore I kept pushing through because I shouldn't be feeling these things. I think the second thing was just denial. Someone had said, Linz, maybe you should get help. And I was just like, no. Depression didn't sound great in my mind. It had a negative connotation. I just imagined sadness. And honestly, that wasn't Linzi. The year before, I was happy. I was positive. I lived life to the full. And yet this year, that wasn't the case. I was sad. I was hopeless. I was pushing through. I was fighting to get through each day, but I didn't want to admit that there was a problem and that I probably did need help because of the connotation or what depression sounds like. And I think for me, I had to wrestle through, I rather wanted to have a physical problem. Eventually, when I did get help, I had to go and get blood tests. And I hate needles, but I made my mom take me for these blood tests because I wanted something wrong to be with me physically. And they came back clear. So I was like, oh no. And so I think because I had the wrong idea of depression as well, I wasn't sleeping in all day. I was still going to work. I could still exercise. And so I thought, I think I'm actually fine. And I would have good days here and there. But most days I finished a teaching day feeling like sick. My arms would burn. I felt like I couldn't carry on. It was hard to hold back the tears. Sometimes I'd just break down in the staff room. I can only describe it as every day feeling like a fight. The year ahead seemed like this huge mountain that I had to climb up. And I was like, I had taught grade 1 the year before, and I knew how much effort it required, and yet I felt like I cannot help these kids get to December. I don't have the emotional capacity right now. And teaching was no longer a passion for me. It was a stress. It took all my energy, and it was something that I used to love. And so this is what I went through. But I think with all of this, the wrestle back and forth, down in my heart, I knew I wasn't fine. But because of my high expectations, I was like, I have to be fine. And so I kept pushing, and unfortunately, it took a panic attack for me to realize, okay, I'm not doing well at all, and I need to get some help.
Thanks, Linz. Thanks so much. I think going on from that, I want to ask you some questions. Is what helped you, and what are some things that didn't help you?
I think what helped is just having people who were understanding, people who didn't confirm that I shouldn't be in this space, because that was the message I gave myself. But people who were just there for me to be honest and open and vulnerable with, just to hear me out. The dark moments, the being angry with God, the frustration, the asking why I was going through this, and not saying you shouldn't, and just trust in God and just pray. That's not helpful when you're in a dark space. I think I was lucky enough to have time off work. I think there was no way I could have continued on teaching because it's such a giving job. I had to have time away. That was very helpful. I was fortunate enough to be sent home, so I came down to Durban, and it's definitely been a time of healing. I started therapy, which was incredible. I loved seeing my therapist twice a week. I recommend that for anybody. And then eventually, and then going on medication months ago. And so I think a combination of these things definitely did help. But I think, when people are like, just shake it off or dismiss it, that is not helpful at all, because that makes you feel worse about the state you're in. It makes you feel like, well, I shouldn't, because someone else also thinks that. I know lots of people would say to me, this is just a season. And I would think, is that encouraging or not? I think it was helpful for me, because when you're in a dark place, it's consuming, and it feels like you're going to be stuck there forever. So when people are like, oh, it's just a season, you'll get through, I didn't personally find that encouraging. And so I think also just having people that were compassionate and kind, and not judgmental on, oh, you have to be on medication, oh, you're young, oh, you shouldn't be, you're a disciple. Having people who were compassionate really helped me.
Amen. Thank you, my love. I think to emphasize here for spouses and for parents, I appreciated Jackie sharing so much earlier that as a spouse and a parent, when you're not the one with depression, out of love, you want to try and fix the situation. and you can't. As I know, husbands, you want to fix your wife, or wife, you want to fix your husband. You want to provide the solutions. You want to try and chivvy them out of this and push the dark cloud away. And it's actually the worst thing to do, like Linzi said, because it makes that person feel even more worthless and more helpless because they can't just snap out of it. And I think one thing to understand is that if you have never had depression, you can read about it, you can learn about it, but you cannot fully understand it. And that was my experience. I studied it. I studied psychology. I wanted to learn because I was in the ministry. I wanted to help people. So I studied it. I read about it. And then I had depression, and I have depression. And I learned so much more through that and the reality of what it means to have that dark cloud over your head. So it's better to even say to somebody, your spouse, your child, I don't know how to help you, but I am here and I love you, and we will get you the help you need. Because we shouldn't feel a pressure to try and fix something that we can't fix. But what we can do is give that support and show that support. And intervention is crucial. It won't just blow over it if it is something that's getting worse. Watch your children, monitor those symptoms, but don't just try to encourage them and say, just think positively, or come on, you're being silly, get over it now. It doesn't work like that. I think I do want to mention in here too, for single moms, first of all, I take my hat off to you. You have an enormous role, or single parents, it's not just single moms, but you're doing it all by yourself, your mom and your dad. So aside from monitoring your kids, you need to recognize in yourself when you aren't coping, because you have a lot on your shoulders. I just wanted to throw that in there. I know we've got a lot that we're dealing with today, and things that we're sharing. Just before we end off, I want to mention that treatment of depression is also not one solution. But I do want to talk about why medication helps. Raj, if you could go on to that next slide there. Okay. The analogy I always use with depression, and I say to people, with depression, you're trying to walk uphill with a ball and a chain around your ankle, but you're trying to keep up with the other people who are walking uphill who don't have a ball and chain. So, and so medication, as it were, unlocks the chain. It doesn't change the hill. You still have to deal with the hill, but it just gives you that little bit of a boost so that you can actually walk up the hill. And I think, sometimes we need to think about, we'll readily take antibiotics when we've got pneumonia or other medicines for bronchitis or insulin for diabetes, but we'll be terrified at the thought of taking something that affects our mood. And yet we need to see it in the same way, the biology of the brain. Sometimes our brain needs that boost because it's not making it, and it's not able to make that neurotransmitter on its own. I just want Linz to share a little bit how she felt the difference with the medication and how it helped her.
All right. Well, unfortunately, when you start taking medication, it does get worse before it gets better. So you don't just take one pill and then, return to your old self. But I think for me, I didn't want to take the meds because I wanted to get through this by myself and persevere. But obviously, like I had mentioned in my story, it got to the point where I needed help. But I think in the beginning, I started my medication and it definitely got worse. I could not eat. I didn't really want to eat much at all. I didn't go out of the house for quite a while. I was exhausted and weak a lot of the time. My mom literally up to Joburg and take care and drive me around and take me to the doctor. I was angry and frustrated, had a lot of wrestling to do with God. I felt like a failure because I couldn't teach, I couldn't be a teen worker, I couldn't do all the things that I was doing before. And everything still felt like a lot of effort. My dad was like, come, we'll fly you down. And I was like, Dad, thinking of getting on a flight is so much effort. I can't do that right now. So that was still, I was on medication, but it still took many weeks to settle in. But now moving to the more positive side is it definitely, when it kicks in, it takes that cloud away. It then enables you to build yourself up back again. And so I was able to do that emotionally through, like I said, starting therapy. I loved having someone I could talk to, who we talked about the depression and anxiety, but then we also went back to childhood issues, and I was able to talk about my life with her, someone I hadn't met before. Physically, there was, because we're in lockdown, there was a lockdown marathon challenge that you could finish a marathon over 21 days, because that's when it was meant to be 3 weeks. So I entered that, and it was good for me because you had to do 2Ks a day. And that helped me because I went from not being able to get out of bed, or, you know, I was so weak, to start running again and getting physically fit. You know, spiritually, it enabled me to connect with God. There was a time I could not pray out loud. I don't know if it was my anger or just being so exhausted, but medication has helped me then to connect with God again and rebuild my spiritual foundation. I think it enables me just to be more consistent. You don't, for me personally, I haven't experienced huge highs or extreme lows, to be more consistent emotionally. And I think finally, I feel like Linzi is back. The girl that I missed from 2019, that I'd lost, I'm finally feeling like, cool, I'm back, and I'm back on track and getting stronger than I was before. Thank you.
Thank you, my love. Yeah. I appreciate your thoughts and your sharing. I know we've got to get on, and I just want to highlight, though, that treatment isn't one thing. Medication, Paul talked about things, counseling. We've got to deal with the issues. We can't run away from them. Exercise, nutrition. I hope that, you know, just in some way, these things that we've shared today, some of the symptoms, the signs to look out for, the causes, the treatment, just enough for you to feel, well, I just need to find out more. I've got some direction, what to look for, things to look out for in my own life, for my family, for my spouse. And then on our final page, just some resources and references that have been extremely helpful for myself, and things that I recommend to others. So, and yeah, please feel free to drop us a WhatsApp. I know we have some questions and answers later, but I hope that in some small way this could help you. Thank you.
Introduce Wendy, who's going to be sharing about anxiety with us. You know, Wendy works as a registered clinical psychologist for the Department of Defense, the Military Health Services. She's worked there since 2011. She completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Natal, the Pietermaritzburg campus, and then went on to complete her postgraduate studies at the University of Western Cape, and did her internship at Lentefier Psychiatric Hospital in Mitchell's Plain. She currently works with a wide demographic of children to adults, and she's based here in Tshwane, and works for the Defense Force here in Tshwane. And she is just a great help, I know, for me personally, as I lead the church in Tshwane. I rely on herself, as a partner and a resource in being able to meet the needs of our fellowship here. It's an honor to have you just share with us today, Wendy. You can take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Themba. It's such a great honor and opportunity to share about anxiety and fear, especially during this time of COVID-19. So what I'm going to do is briefly define anxiety and fear. So basically, anxiety is an anticipation of a future threat. Anxiety is a distressing, unpleasant, and a state of nervousness and uneasiness. While fear is the emotional and physical behavioral responses of real or perceived imminent threat. So there are many, many examples of fear and anxiety in the Bible. What we really need to understand is that fear is normal and anxiety is a normal response. So in the face of COVID-19, there's a study that has been done by the Anxiety and Depression Group, SADC, which indicates that there is already an increase in anxiety because 55% of the calls that they are getting from people who are dealing with anxiety. Okay. So I'm also going to go through what exactly is happening during COVID-19 that is causing us to feel anxiety. Currently, so much uncertainty about our future. We have also been locked down. Some of us who live in small spaces, we just feel cramped. There's no space, personal space. But some people have been locked down alone, and there's a feeling of loneliness. There's also an erosion of our normal coping mechanisms. We can't go out and have coffee with a friend. We cannot socialize. We cannot just have conversations or visits with our friends. And that erosion of social support, also from family. We cannot visit our friends and family or travel to KZN, where I'm from, just to see friends. So that's an erosion of the social support that can be distressing. We are also currently worried, a lot of us are worried about our health and virus, especially for the healthcare workers in the front lines. That's a real, and it's a real fear. It's a reality that we face every day. There's also anxiety about the health of our loved ones, and also the fear of death and losing the people that we love. We've seen also on TV, there's a lot of poverty in the news. There are definitely financial challenges, there's job losses. I think the previous speakers have spoken a lot about just what we are facing as a country currently. Lately, we are facing the real big challenge and fear and anxiety about making the decision about our children going back to school. And some of you have not been at work for about 2 months. The reality of going to school, it's normal to be anxious about that. Working from home has also presented its own challenges with deadlines, but not having the space to do the work. Some people are saying that they cannot, they're not managing the time well. So that can also cause anxiety if we have a deadline. We have to support our friends and families that are struggling. So that can also cause quite a lot of anxiety. So it's quite a lot. But also quite important to note is that if one is already living with anxiety or previously diagnosed, at this point, that anxiety could increase. They could be further distressed. Okay. So where does anxiety come from? So anxiety, like I indicated before, is a very normal reaction to a stressful situation. Some people are more prone to anxiety than other people for various reasons. I think Lisa indicated already, and I think Paul as well, that there are biological factors. I won't get into them. They're quite complex about brain functioning and synapses, but it's important to understand that biology or our brain is the way that fear is caused. Our predisposition, just having a family member who has been diagnosed with anxiety can also impact us. Family history is very important, is an important factor. Psychological factors like trauma, previous trauma, our early life experiences, our thoughts or cognitions, low self-esteem, and also learned behavior. In our families, also as parents, we sometimes model just the way we are and how we act, models for our children, how to manage the fear. So it's a learned behavior sometimes. We also have medical factors. I think Lisa also mentioned with depression. It's the same with anxiety. Some of our medical conditions, like having thyroid, an overactive thyroid can cause anxiety. Sometimes it's the things that we take, like medication. For medication is a legal substance. Some substances are illegal, but some of the things that we take could lead to feeling anxious. The social factors I've already indicated, or environmental factors, those are the things that happen around us, like losing work can cause quite a lot of anxiety, etc. So what is very important is to understand, and I think Lisa also touched on that, is that anxiety is very complex and it's not something that somebody can just snap out of. And this is why the family and people around us need to understand that when one is suffering from anxiety, it's very important to understand, and there shouldn't be an expectation that the individual can just snap out of how they are feeling and what they are feeling. Okay. So we'll look at some of the most common anxiety symptoms, and I will outline some of them and group them in terms of the physical, the psychological, as well as the behavioral. So focusing on the physical, so this is how anxiety looks like. You may have your heart, feel your heart pounding, shortness of breath, dizziness, sweating, headache, stomach pains. You may experience a dry mouth. You may experience restlessness, nausea, insomnia, aches, or pains. You may experience numbness, trembling, or nail biting. Some of the psychological symptoms is excessive worry, irritability, impatience, feeling on edge. You may feel fatigue. You may experience some vivid dreams. Sometimes you feel your mind racing. At times you may just feel your mind going blank. You may experience being indecisive, decreased concentration, and also memory challenges. The behavior that can result from having anxiety is phobic behavior, so you really become scared. You may also avoid some situations and be distressed in social situations. So the impact of anxiety on the family is that one may feel, especially if you're feeling impatient and agitated, you feel tense all the time. This can really impact the family negatively. and this can cause discord as well in the family. The symptoms of avoidance and can cause actually, for example, if you're avoiding, you may not want to go to the shops, so that leaves the other people in the household with a lot of work and more responsibility. Also, the poor concentration and lack of sleep, for example, may make it very difficult to be productive at work, and a family member may also just be emotionally absent for the family. The impact of the more physical symptoms is that this may cause fear and anxiety for the family. The family may worry about your own health, the individual who is going through anxiety. The family may worry about the health. And also this could impact the family because the assessments to rule out the medical condition may be quite financially straining. Also, children may be negatively impacted by anxiety. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a learned behavior. So when they observe the anxiety, they may learn to also be anxious themselves. Right. So so we've spoken about normative anxiety, but there's also when anxiety becomes a serious condition, these are the signs to look for. So when anxiety is present, usually more than a month and more, 4 weeks to a month, and it's excessive, it's not just being afraid, or then that's when you need to look at possibly getting help. So also anxiety should cause significant impairment in functioning, either at work or at home. When the impact is quite significant, that's when you need to think about seeking help. Also, as an individual, if you're feeling distressed quite a lot, you think about your fear quite a lot, that is the time that you need to think about consulting a professional. Also very important that two things are important. One, it's much easier for one to, it's important for an individual to see their own symptoms and identify, and it's easier that way rather than somebody saying, I think you are anxious, how about seeing a doctor? So it's very important to be very vulnerable with and honest with oneself, and that usually has the best outcomes, because when you seek help, you are then very ready, because usually consultations, I think Paul was saying he struggled with just seeking help, but once you have made the decision, once you are honest with yourself and you make a decision to seek help, it goes much easier. And also it's important to not diagnose yourself. It's good to know the signs and the symptoms, but leave the diagnosis to a healthcare professional. Especially with anxiety, you will see that there are a lot of symptoms that are very medical or physical. So like the pounding of the heart or the pain may actually be a physical condition or a medical condition. So it's important to leave the diagnosis to a medical professional, because medical consultation will always be first line. Like I was saying, that psychology is the last. Once a medical condition has been ruled out, that's when you can think possibly that it is a psychological condition. So I can't stress that enough, that know the symptoms, consult a medical doctor, and once every medical condition could possibly present, it has been ruled out, that's when we are thinking most in that it could be anxiety. Okay, so the previous speakers have also touched a bit on that. Can be physiological, which is basically medication, and a combination, I think Paul mentioned this, a combination of medication and psychology has the best outcomes in our experience. Psychological interventions, we look at psychotherapy. CBT is quite an effective treatment. What it is basically, I always say that CBT or cognitive behavior therapy is actually a biblical principle of renewing your mind. That's basically what we do when we take someone with anxiety through cognitive behavior therapy. It's teaching them how to change how they are thinking. It's teaching them how to replace negative thoughts with positive thinking. Just really renewing the mind. It works amazing and very, very efficient in treating anxiety and anxiety symptoms. Therapy is actually usually very individualized, because we don't only do CBT, but we also look at our family background. We do a very thorough assessment, so that I think it's Linzi who was saying that she had an opportunity to deal with the childhood challenges. So it's really individualized, and it's not a one fit all. So we help the individual deal with every aspect that could be impacting why they are presenting with anxiety. So what is really, really important is to, some helping points is to acknowledge, as an individual, it's quite important to acknowledge your own anxiety and talk about it. Talking about, I think basically generally mental health is quite important. I find also that starting a journal is a tool that we use a lot as psychologists, and it really helps a lot of individuals. Starting a journal could be helpful in managing anxiety. Writing about, it's like having a conversation with yourself, writing about how you're feeling. A lot of the patients find it quite useful. In terms of your social environment, it's quite important to manage your lifestyle, to minimize your triggers. I think it's Paul who was talking about TV and social media and news. That can actually be quite a trigger for anxiety when we overwhelm ourselves with watching the negative news. So try to minimize that. Financial management tools are very important at this time. It's important to manage your finances and talk to people who can help us, because that's one of the stressors at this time. It's also important to keep a routine, because that helps you to manage your time and keeps you quite contained, so that you don't feel overwhelmed. I think Paul has spoken about diet. He's doing great, especially our caffeine. There's an indication that caffeine can increase anxiety. So it's important to watch your diet, exercise, meditation. Paul has spoken about that. I will go into deeper detail in terms of family support. prayer and spiritual connectedness is also a way of managing anxiety. We are talking about anxiety that is not a disorder. And also discipling is quite important. It's just such an amazing tool, discipling, and such, and I've always said that it's such an advantage for us just to have a space where you can be honest and vulnerable with someone, and they are vulnerable and honest with you. And I hope it's something that we don't take for granted. All right. So family support, I've focused on that because it's quite essential during the pandemic. It's very important to, when you When managing anxiety, the family is very important. It's very important, especially for a spouse or when a child has anxiety, to move away from saying you have the problem and owning it as a family, and saying we are going to manage the anxiety. It's important to care for one another. To care and understand and educate ourselves about anxiety, because once we have the knowledge and know what anxiety is and how it presents, it becomes easier to support the spouse or the person or the child who has anxiety. I think Jackie is doing quite well. I think she mentioned absolutely everything that I have highlighted. An attitude of caring for the person who is presenting with anxiety, having empathy, really putting yourself in the other person's shoes. It's important to listen rather than to give advice, and really listen. And how we can listen is you ask the other person, what needs do they have? Because a lot of the times we don't know what to do, but it's important to ask a question like, how can I be of assistance to you? What do you need me to do? And letting the person who has anxiety tell you, rather than you assuming what they need. And I think Linzi touched a bit on that. And that's how we learn. The other person gets to learn how to meet your needs. So also what's important in that equation is, so if you are the one who is presenting with anxiety, you have to know yourself. You have to know and also verbalize your needs so that your family can understand and so be able to be of assistance. Because if you don't know what your needs are and you don't know what support you need, it becomes very difficult for the family to be able to then support you. So things like journaling, starting a journal or talking, that's where you get to know yourself, and that's where you get to know what it is that you need. So the family can be a great resource of encouragement. Like Jackie was saying, and Paul was talking about how encouraging Jackie has been. That's definitely what is needed for the family to manage and help the individual who is presenting with anxiety. Okay, and I have put up a slide on the resources that are available to assist us during this time. There is a lot of, I often get distressed because when I hear people saying, I don't know where to get the help, because in South Africa, we actually have a great network of and systems where we can get help. What's great about the hotlines is that you, on the other side, is somebody that you don't know, somebody who won't judge you, somebody who will listen to you, and a lot of people that are to assist us. So I've personally also used the hotline when I have felt distressed And it's quite comforting to be able to be on the phone and talk to someone on the other side who is willing to help. So also during the COVID pandemic, there are more resources that have been made available. So it's quite important to tap into the help, but also quite important to reach out to other disciples. We are always ready and willing to assist when there's a need. I think that's all from me, but also I have a verse to encourage everyone. It's in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 8. We are really all resilient, and that verse is really about hope and resilience, that a lot can happen to us, but God has given us hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate just your willingness to always help us. I know that for me personally, you are such a great resource. I take great comfort in knowing that I can always just give you a call or have a chat and get some more help about the specific situations in the ministry, as I try to provide counseling for different people in the church. You are always just so willing to be a resource for the church. Your contribution is highly appreciated, and your partnership as well in the gospel is highly appreciated. And thank you so much for your presentation today. Very educational, and I hope that we will also make some of the slides, especially the resource slides at the end, available to everyone even after the sessions today.